Hello, Walpole. My name is Ellen Curran, and I am your host for Walpole Green. Our goal is to present to you programs focused on the effects of climate change and what we can do to combat it. I am a member of Walpole Green. Walpole Green is a group of Walpole citizens dedicated to a healthy environment and to achieving 100% recyclable energy. We believe in protecting our natural resources and working to address the climate crisis in Walpole, the state, our country, and the world. For the last few episodes, I have been focusing on composting. We spoke to Black Earth, a composting business that serves several communities, including Walpole, and composts the food scraps at their Groton community facility, creating rich black soil. We also spoke to Donna Sherman and Mary McDougall, who are consumers of Black Earth. And today, we are excited to meet with Lois and Philip Chekarowski, who create rich soil for their gardens via backyard composting. Lois and Philip spent their childhoods in families with a garden. Lois grew up in Middletown, Connecticut, with parents who were committed to organic gardening. Her mother came from a farm in Iowa, and her father exhibited a lifelong passion for gardening. Her parents had a very large garden plot and grew and preserved food in abundance. For many years, they enabled 3 families, their own, a brother's, and hers, to be self-sufficient with a 12-month-a-year supply of vegetables. Compost piles were a fact of life, making use of all garden and refuge, food scraps, and manure from their chickens. Philip also grew up in a family that had a large garden. His father grafted apple trees and took great pride in his garden. Philip was committed to continuing the practice of gardening and rented garden space while a city dweller in Dorchester after college in Boston. Lois and Philip moved to Walpole in 1980 and started a 40-foot by 40-foot garden using organic gardening practices. They were deeply influenced by the writers Wendell Berry and Robert Rodale Organic Gardening magazine and began the practice of composting to enrich their garden. Through the following years, they supplemented their compost with contributions from a flock of chickens and pygmy goats. Their yard includes a range of other plants, including raspberries, blueberries, and an apple tree. Seeds are bought from Fedco Seeds, a seed co-op dedicated to New England native plants. Lois has also been coordinating a gardening team at United Church in Walpole. For 15 years, the church has maintained an organic garden there, raising abundant crops of vegetables for the benefit of local food pantries. So let's go over to where you have your garden plot. So here we are in their abundant garden, and I can smell the difference. It smells so good and so green and so fresh. How large is this garden again?
It's 40 by 40 feet.
Okay. And can you show us some things what you grow?
Yeah, so one thing we have right now, so we have 4 things or so that are still growing, and one is beans.
Okay. And it's fall, just want people to know.
That's right. So the garden is waning. We've taken out most of the tomato plants, but there still are a few things that are continue to bear that we're eating. So Swiss chard is one of them, and green beans is another.
Yeah.
Yep, Philip has a green bean here.
Swiss chard, right behind us.
And actually, there's a couple of different kinds of Swiss chard. There's that many people are familiar with. This is called perpetual spinach, and it's a kind of Swiss chard that's very sweet. More tastes like spinach. We have peppers still.
Yeah,
there's a beautiful red one over there where Philip might.
Should I pick it?
Sure.
Yeah.
And there's squash. We have a lot of butternut squash. This was a banner year. All that rain that we got, loved it. So this is a banner year for butternut squash.
I just want to say, I am getting hungry just being in this garden.
Yeah. So this is.
Let me taste the I'm going
Green
to taste
bean.
because, oh my God, they taste sweeter, crisper, and juicier than what you get in the supermarket. What do you find with your other products or your other vegetables, the
Yeah,
difference?
well, we find the same. And part of it is that you can pick it as you need it. And so it's picked at its prime and just before you eat it.
And then also stores, commercial growers grow varieties that are, they transport well and they last a long time, but they're not necessarily the most tasty. So we're growing varieties that we particularly like. And one thing we like about Fetco Seeds, they offer a lot of different new varieties every year to try out. So we grow things that are maybe you could never get in a store. Is what we're different varieties, which are a lot more tastier, particularly like tomatoes. You know, it's hard to get good tomatoes in the supermarket.
Yeah, just sweet.
So Fedco Seeds is a seed co-op that's been in business for about 40 years, and it's located in Maine.
We started buying seeds from
were
them
one of their
almost the very
early-
earliest of their existence. Yeah.
But we continue to get our seeds from them, so they're mainly organically raised and kinds of plants that are appropriate for our environment. So it's a great place to go for seeds.
And look at that beautiful red pepper.
And we also have winter squash. We have over 20 winter squash growing, if you can just barely see them in there.
I can see one over there.
Yeah, and winter squash is very good because they're a good winter crop. They keep a long time. And we have 2 rows of potatoes. And while you're talking about other things, I'll dig some up and I can bring them over. How about?
Okay.
Yeah.
So in the soil that we see here, does it all come from composting?
Well, we put all of our compost on this garden, and I particularly put it on, like if I'm making a hill to plant squash in, I'll put a big mound of compost, so I sort of place the compost where it will do the most good. It's really not enough for the entire garden, so we have purchased manure to put on. Sometimes we get the from Maine. There's a kind of composted manure that you can get. But so we do supplement our compost, but it's you will see it's like black gold.
Yeah. So what does the compost actually do for the vegetables?
Oh, well, it renews the soil, and it has, Philip could tell you better what the compost holds, but it's very rich. It's like very rich soil.
Minerals in it.
Yeah.
Okay. Here come the potatoes.
The potatoes.
Wow. Are those
So
red
these are red
bliss?
potatoes?
Are they red bliss or just
We got them from Gilmore's.
Yeah.
And I couldn't tell you that we got red potatoes and white potatoes. So that's.
So we have probably a
tell you the
bushel of
variety.
potatoes in the ground as
I
well.
would
Wow.
say.
Yeah.
They look great.
So,
I'm ready for a baked potato.
yeah.
Okay. So is there anything else you'd like to show? Like I noticed you also have marigolds. The marigolds that I'm looking at?
Yeah.
What do the marigolds do?
Well, traditionally people have planted marigolds because they have a scent that will repel insects. But they also look really pretty.
They do. They do.
Yeah, we have raspberries over there on the fence. And you'll see on the left that wispy kind of green, those are asparagus.
Oh, wow.
So after you cut the asparagus, that's the seed part, which you let grow for the.
So that's perennial. That will
perennial.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
harvest
Anything
that
else
in the
perennial
spring.
here?
Strawberries.
Strawberries.
which
And
are-
raspberries.
Yeah, raspberry. Yeah.
Yummy. So how much time do you actually spend in this garden?
I would say a fair amount of time. It does take time to keep the garden going, and you have to, between the planting, preparing the soil, and planting the seeds, and then conquering the weeds.
Yeah, so watering can be a big issue if it's a dry summer, you know, watering the plants. But if somebody was starting new, they can start very small. And one of the things we don't practice quite as much as we used to is companion planting, where you can plant a lot of things in a small space. And they're things that grow well together. They complement each other. Actually, we do a little of that because the squash was planted in the corn patch.
Oh.
So squash goes out everywhere. So we often grow carrots with the peas, and along the edges carrots and the peas in the middle. So if someone's starting out, they can get a lot of food or a lot of variety of food from a small space, and that's really the way to do it. And we have some planters like on the patio that we planted some tomatoes, cucumbers, lettuce, and it's kind of like a kitchen garden right there.
Very nice.
Yeah.
And how do you water this?
So we don't have a sprinkler system, so we mostly rely on Mother Nature. But when it gets really dry, and again we're following Walpole water guide rules. But we will hand water it if we have an emergency, and then the one day a week we can put the sprinkler on. We will do it, but we try not to water a lot. So putting down mulch.
You have to worry about rain.
Right, yeah. Putting down mulch is the other key thing. So we put down a lot of mulch between the plants to keep the moisture in. And then when choosing crops, choosing crops that might make it be a little more resistant to drought conditions is the other part.
We are now where the compost piles are. So here we see 1, 2, 3 piles. Am I right?
That's correct.
Okay, so can you explain what you put? What are the purpose of the 3 piles and what you put in them?
So if we start on this side, this is the current pile. And so we use what's more known as a code method. We're not looking to have a hot pile, which will make compost in in 90 days or 60 days. We're looking for months up to a year to make compost because we're not in a hurry to get it. So the key about composting is the ratio of carbon to nitrogen, the CN ratio. So when you have something that has a very low ratio, in other words, a lot of nitrogen relative to the amount of carbon, and a good example of that is grass clippings, which have a ratio about 13 to 1, and that's very low. That's a lot of nitrogen, and that's why grass clippings, when they're wet and they're green, they will heat up and they will disintegrate very, very quickly, like in a matter of days. So if you notice there, we also have a thermometer. So we have a thermometer with a 2-foot probe. So when there's grass clippings there, that temperature easily goes up to 140 degrees. Oh. However, we use a method of composting which originally comes from India, the indoor method, that we have been following with Organic Gardening magazine. So it's modified, but that's the origin of it. That's originally where it comes from. And the idea is to layer your compost pile with greens. So greens are the ones that have a lot of nitrogen. Blacks, browns have a lot of carbon. And you want to have a carbon-nitrogen ratio of about 30 to 1 or thereabouts.
Okay.
So you can, when you layer, you can then, we would use leaves which have more carbon in between green things. So you'll layer in green and brown. And then we're bringing out our kitchen compost out here. So we just throw it on the pile.
What's the temperature say?
So right now it's probably about 100 maybe. It's actually just 80, just on the range. Okay. And that's been sitting there for probably 2 weeks maybe now. So so if you go through the piles, this is our green pile. It's ready to be turned over. That pile there is a couple months old, and you can see it's done very well because again it's been the temperature. And that's ready to turn over. So we need to move. That's the current compost that's ready to be used. So we would be putting that in the garden, then turning over those 2 piles, and then now we're getting a lot of green that we're picking up out of the garden that would go in the new pile. And then we're always adding kitchen compost to it. Usually we add a little current humus compost as an activator because it has bacteria in it that you want to grow. And then we also have chickens. So we put in chicken manure which is also very good for the compost. And our chicken manure is mixed with wood shavings, which is what we have down in for the chickens. So that those two together actually make a nice carbon nitrogen ratio. So this would be we would be moving this next. Now, if you were using the compost to do pottings and things, you would probably screen it, but we don't bother screening the compost. And when we turn that over, you'll be surprised how good that compost is. And then when we turn this over, heat up, because the elements of composting, besides the CN ratio, is water and air. Mm-hmm. So you want to turning it over is what is good, because it lets
the
air,
the oxygen.
Lets air back in. That's right. Yeah.
So what can you put in and what can't you put in compost?
Yeah, so we put, as Philip said, all the weeds and refuse from around the yard. We put in scraps from the kitchen. Mm-hmm. We do not put in any oils or meat or fish.
No animal.
No animal products.
Waste. Yeah.
Yeah. Earlier, when I interviewed the people from Black Earth, they actually used fish and they used meats when they composted. Why is it different for you?
So they're doing industrial composting and they're controlling it, mm-hmm. and they can I don't know what temperatures they reach and how fast they move compost through, but they probably do it fairly quickly. So our piles are out in the open, so we don't want to attract animals. Mm-hmm. So if we did any kind of meat, bones, that would attract the animals. So that's the number one reason. Mm-hmm. And also we don't want to do things that might smell. So right now we never smell our compost piles, and so that's the other reason too.
So I can tell you that composting really cuts down on your trash remarkably.
Yes.
Amount, yeah.
Instead
so a lot of it goes here.
You're creating something renewable instead of creating a problem.
That's right.
So we have a stainless steel bucket that has a cover on it in the kitchen, and we bring that out every night, so we don't leave a lot of compost in the house. Mm-hmm. And if you do composting right, there's no odor. We never smell our compost piles.
Do you ever see animals sort of digging into it?
Yeah.
I would say that I'm sure the animals that you have in your backyard, to me, it's always been a sort of a fascinating mystery because you're not aware of them. Mm. And I'm sure that there are animals here, but I'm sure that there would be animals here in everybody else's yard too.
Yeah.
So we have not noticed that there's a particular attraction to we don't draw animals to our yard because we have a compost pile.
Yeah, we never see digging, for example, in the pile or anything.
I know that you do piles, but are there other ways you can compost? In other words, instead of doing piles, are any receptacles you can put them in?
Yeah, so a lot of people do barrels, mm-hmm. And you can turn them. But those tend to work good if you don't have a lot of compost. Mm. But the advantage of them is that you get a very high temperature, so you do produce compost it could be in a matter of 60 days. So you can turn it over very, very rapidly. But
if it was mainly kitchen scraps,
that would work well. Yeah. Some people do pits where they dig a pit and put the compost in that. The other thing people do is they use pellets. See, a lot of people put pellets up, and that contains the compost. The disadvantage of pellets, the advantage of piles, is it's easy just to turn it over. Mm. With pellets, you gotta lift it over.
Yeah.
Walpole used to offer those black. They were like vinyl circles. Yeah. And there'd be a cover to them, and that's another way people would compost.
Oh, okay.
So it contains it in a.
Do they still have that?
I don't know, but we used to have a couple of those. That we do so much it doesn't make sense to. But it's a good way to contain compost. So if somebody has a smaller yard, they don't have a lot of material. They really want to contain it. They don't want to have it in the open. Mm-hmm. Those work very well. And that's kind of in between doing open piles or piles which have maybe some sides to it, and then doing the container that you actually, a metal container that you rotate. So that's a good way to contain it, and they're very inexpensive. And they have a top to them, and they also have a bottom, so it keeps it off the ground. So it's kind of like a little bit of a lift there. So that's another way of people could compost. So we could do sides here, but again,
This makes sense. Works.
Low work, and it works very well, easy to turn over.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I do want to say there is a word, there's a little word of caution turning over your compost, because there can be a lot of pathogens in the compost. So if you were doing it right, you would probably wear a mask and gloves when you did the turning over.
Oh, okay.
There's not a high risk of that, by the way. We don't really bother about it, but I just want to mention
Plus
that's
you're
something.
Outside, I think that.
Well, you're outside, but there can be. There's a lot of
Gloves is
bacteria,
probably
and
a good idea.
well,
Gloves is
it can be a good
probably a good
idea.
idea.
Yeah. By the way, if the compost goes over 122 degrees, it will kill most pathogens and pathogens, and also it will kill some seeds. So
That you don't want.
you don't want. Yes. Now we are very lax on our seeds. So when we bring all of our green from the garden here, we don't worry about the seeds. So we worry about it on the other end. And we handle it partly by doing a lot of mulching, so it's harder for them to grow. And then so it's, again, there's be a trade-off. But if somebody was really worried about weeds, they may be more selective what greens from the garden they put in their compost.
So when you said earlier that you trim the piles, can you be more explicit about how it's done?
Yeah, so really what we're doing is we're taking the oldest compost pile that's now has been completed. The composting process is completed.
We call it black gold.
Black gold. we move that out of the compost pile to the garden. Then that gives the empty spot to turn over the one adjacent to it. And then when that spot's empty, we can turn this one over.
So you sort of turn it over to the next.
To the next one. So we're always moving out the mature compost, and that makes the open spot to the.
And that usually is done in the fall, is it?
Spring.
Spring, okay.
Because we use it in the spring, the
That
spring.
makes sense.
We're doing it this fall because
We need the,
we're out of
this.
room.
So we delayed. I might have moved it earlier, but we're doing it right now. Yeah, so it varies. Because we're going to plant winter rye, so we don't want to put the compost down on the beds before we plant until after we do the winter rye and actually turn it over.
And you add leaves to the compost?
So we have our leaves. We have a leaf pot way in the back. So leaves, those leaves are a year old, and so they're good to add with like grass clippings to get the right CN ratio.
Yeah.
So we don't do this scientifically, and we only usually turn over once or twice. So we're not in a hurry to get our compost.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
once and twice.
Turning it over.
How often though? Once or twice?
Oh, for each pile.
Oh, so in other words,
we may
just
turn
let
this. We may turn this pile over just twice, maybe.
and just let it.
Just let it
happen.
sit. Yeah.
Oh, that's
Yeah, because
interesting.
everything will compost in about a year, unless you have really, large, twigs or, But if you, pretty well almost anything green will compost. That's biodegradable. Will compost in a year. When we do layers, we do a layer of green, which be all the plant material. It might be 4 inches or so. Then a layer of black, and that would be your carbon,
compost.
and then a layer of and then a small layer, half an inch of existing compost, to give the activation.
Oh.
Because that's where your bacteria and your fungi are that you want to grow in the compost pile. When we put leaves down, that's to balance the high nitrogen green things. But you don't want to put a foot of leaves, because they will make a matted mess that'll be very hard to turn over, and they won't rot very quick. So actually, we take leaves that are a year old. They're the last year's leaves that we put over there. And this year's leaves we're going to put behind the compost pile, which we've done in past years. So we don't want to have the leaves cover all of our land. So yeah.
So within a year, they've decomposed enough to.
The leaves will, in a year they will decompose enough so that when they're in the compost pile, they will decompose all the way. Yeah, so oak leaves can take a couple years to decompose. Maple leaves and other leaves like that would take less time, and they're actually better. But
Oh, okay.
but our oak leaves have been sitting there a year, so I don't feel shy. And we're not going to, like I said, we don't put a huge 12 inches of leaves on the compost pile. They will compost over there, and that's also compost. But when we have the piles that we're turning over and we're managing, we want to try to keep the carbon nitrogen ratio fairly good. And again, we don't do that scientifically. Some people would actually figure out what proportion of black and green you need to use depending what it is. So.
Do you compost in the winter?
We do, yeah.
Yeah. So we do it year round. I mean, it probably doesn't decompose. It probably doesn't work. We don't come out and turn it when it's 20 below zero out here. But we do just keep adding to it, and then in the spring things start to work again.
So every day we bring a compost out. There's never a day we don't do it virtually. Yeah.
That is
And
nice.
it might be snow covered, and we just put it on the pile.
So when you trim them over, that's it. That's how you aerate.
Yes. Yeah. Now there's another method. There's other methods of doing that. Some people put like PCV pipe in, which has holes in it, and you can make like a path. We have our corn, actually our sunflower stalks are good to put in a compost pile, putting them down, because they actually, the center cores decay fast, and that can be a path for air.
Okay.
I also sometimes put in the very bottom, I put a lot of twigs and branches, and that keeps it off the ground a little bit. So that's another method of doing that.
Okay, and watering, how often do you water it?
Really just making sure it's wet when you turn it over, inside the pile.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you want to be wet enough so if you were to squeeze it, it would feel like a wet sponge.
How much compost do you think you produce in a year?
That probably is a year, actually a little more than a year's worth.
Okay.
So maybe a cubic, shy of a cubic yard, maybe. Yeah.
All right.
And you asked about using how we use the compost.
Yes.
So as the garden gets put to bed, we will be adding the compost that's ready to the garden
In
beds.
the fall.
And then we plant winter rye as a cover crop,
Oh, really?
because that also, so then early in the spring we dig that in, and so that also contributes to the,
Is it done, you plant it in your garden?
Yeah.
The winter rye?
So we do it right now.
Oh, wow.
So the beds that we're turning over, it'll be time to plant winter rye, and it'll grow in the fall, and it'll start growing in the spring. And you just want to make sure you turn it over early enough so that it's easy to turn over.
Yeah,
So
before the
decompose.
roots get too deep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When we do layers, we do a layer of green, which be all the plant material. It might be 4 inches or so. Then a layer of black, and that would be your carbon.
compost.
And then a layer of and then a small layer, half an inch of existing compost to give the activation.
Oh.
Because that's where your bacteria and your fungi are that you want to grow in the compost pile. So when we put leaves down, that's to balance the high nitrogen green things. But you don't want to put a foot of leaves, because they will make a matted mess that'll be very hard to turn over, and they won't rot very quick. So actually we take leaves that are a year old. They're the last year's leaves that we put over there. And this year's leaves we're going to put behind the compost pile, which we've done in past years. So we don't want to have the leaves cover all of our land. So yeah.
So within a year they've decomposed enough to...
The leaves will, in a year they will decompose enough so that when they're in the compost pile, they will decompose all the way. Yeah, so oak leaves can take a couple years to decompose. Maple leaves and other leaves like that would take less time, and they're actually better. But our oak leaves have been sitting there a year, so I don't feel shy. And we're not going to, like I said, we don't put a huge 12 inches of leaves on the compost pile. They will compost over there, and that's also compost. But when we have the piles that we're turning over and we're managing, we want to try to keep the carbon nitrogen ratio fairly good. And again, we don't do that scientifically. Some people would actually figure out what proportion of black and green you need to use depending what it is. So,
what is the life cycle of beginning the compost to when it's ready?
Yeah. So that pile, the active pile now, it was probably about 3 feet higher about a month ago.
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks
2
ago.
weeks ago.
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago.
Not very long ago.
Yeah.
We were adding very actively to that because we were starting to close down the garden. So there were a lot of things to put on there. And you can see how much it's compressed already. So I would say that pile has sat there it will have sat there for maybe 3 weeks, a month. And then, but it's ready to turn.
We would have turned it over probably a week ago if you weren't coming.
So, yeah. So, and then it will sit like that for probably. That one's going to get turned over too.
And that pile is only about 3 months old. It's not very old. Yeah. So compost is fairly quick. It's doing good. Yeah.
So that pile, when it gets turned, will probably sit there until the spring, and then it will definitely be ready to use.
Yeah. So it really depends on the carbon nitrogen ratio. If you have a ratio of so grass clippings is 12 to 1. That's a very high ratio in nitrogen, a very hot pile. A more normal ratio would be 30 to 50 to 1, and that's what that pile is. We're going to get compost this fall from that. And then a higher, than a ratio of like 100 to 1, that's going to take a year to.
So really, it's more of the nitrogen.
How much nitrogen? Nitrogen
more
is
nitrogen than the carbon.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and you don't want too much. So a hot pile, what can happen is that you run out of carbon, so that the process of breaking down, it can first you can make ammonia, so you can have but we've never seen that, by the way.
Yeah.
But it's not the optimal ratio for long-term composting. Yeah, you're better off, like I said, to be 30. Now, interestingly enough, at the end of the process, the ratio is 10 to 1, because the bacteria is doing the decomposing, and it's using nitrogen and carbon to do that process. So at the end, you're going to have less of both of those. So the normal ratio at the very end is, when you get humus, is about 10 to 1. Yeah.
But people should not be intimidated. You should not feel like this is a really complicated process. And if I don't turn it at the right time, then it's all for naught. Really, you just, you bring your table scraps out and you put them in that pile, and sometime within a reasonable period of time, and it gets really big and you think it's now, you turn it over. And then you're probably good. I mean, if once a year you get all of this incredible fertilizer for your plants, that's a plus.
If you didn't do anything, you're going to get compost in a year from the pile.
It's not hard.
Yeah, and we're not. And like I said, we're not. Some people are looking to get compost, within 60 days, and we're not. We're not in a hurry, So
you can read up and you get all the details about how to have a perfect compost pile, but just do it. I would really encourage people to garden, whatever degree of gardening you can do. It's a wonderful way to be out in nature, and you get incredible vegetables to eat, and just feeling that you know how to grow your own food. I feel that it's really important for people to retain that ability and to pass it on to their children.
I agree, and I think children should know that vegetables don't really come from a supermarket.
That's right.
And it doesn't matter how, you can have a very small garden, like we said, do a companion garden. You can get a lot in. And one of the fun things about gardening is every year we have some big successes, we have some big failures, And every year we're starting to think about what seeds, and we always plant something new. And it's just really a whole world to explore on plants. And right now a big thing is heirloom species, varieties. That we have heirloom tomatoes, for example, and some other things as well. Yeah.
So you asked about produce from
Yes.
the garden. So one thing I wanted to show off is our apples, because this has been a good year for apples. And we don't spray, so they aren't always perfect. But this year, close. So there's that. And then the other thing is ground cherry that I just wanted to show you. So ground cherries, these ground cherries came from my mother from Iowa. She brought them to New England when she moved here, and we've always had them in our garden. They self-sow. So once you have ground cherries, you have ground cherries. And I've even passed them on to my son now in his garden. But they have a little husk like this.
Oh.
And if you just take that and pop up.
Here we go. Okay, I'm going to eat it. Okay. It's interesting. It's not sweet. It almost tastes meaty. It's very good. I almost can see it with maybe turkey, something like that.
My mother used to make jam,
Yeah,
ground cherry jam.
very good.
One thing I was just going to mention about watering is that if we would probably do a water drip system if we really need to water more.
Okay.
So
and how's that done? How do you...
We have water to the garden, so they would just put in pipes. So they're really like plastic pipes. They're
And you can
they just
also
have-
purchase. We actually this summer we purchased some drip hoses, and we're prepared to use them.
Yeah.
The early part of the summer was very dry, and then we got all this rain. So
So they just have little holes in them.
Oh, okay.
All the way along. They're usually a very flexible pipe,
Yeah.
and the water that way it just drips out very slowly, and
It doesn't get too wet, but it stays moist.
stay moist, and it doesn't evaporate. You don't have a high evaporation rate because you're not pooling the water.
it delivers it directly to the plant as opposed to.
Yeah, you can actually put it around plant. It's a very flexible hose, so you can actually put it around plants in a circle and continue going.
So maybe the ending should be that there's lots of information that we gave. It should be simple and fun, and it's hard to make a mistake. Just enjoy. Thank you very much. This was wonderful. I hope that everybody in Walpole who's interested in gardening, looks at this episode and is encouraged.